Marvel is one of the most successful movie studios in the world and has the highest grossing film franchise of all time, and almost everything they put out is a box office success. However, it was recently announced that the studio would be canceling several projects, including both movies and TV shows. Why would such a successful studio do this? Is it due to recent films that haven't performed as expected? Are audiences finally getting fatigued from the superhero genre? Is the Marvel downfall truly upon us? Let's dive in and find out. On May 2nd of 2008, the first Iron Man hit theaters and changed the landscape of cinema forever. It was Marvel's debut film, and they hit an absolute goldmine, racking in over $585 million in the box office. Iron Man was praised by critics for its innovation in visual effects, a fantastic performance by Robert Downey Jr., and incredible action sequences unlike any other superhero film before it. Marvel knew they had created something special, and only days after the film's release, they named Kevin Feige, the producer of the film, as the president of Marvel Studios. Feige had a vision to create an expansive cinematic universe out of all the Marvel characters, and the success of Iron Man gave him everything he needed to do it. He broke his plan into 6 phases, with phase 1 being the assembly, which would build up to the first Avengers film. It all made sense and seemed like the right direction for the studio to go in. But this new endeavor would also start to shift how Marvel films were created. Only a month after the original Iron Man, The Incredible Hulk released to mixed reviews by both critics and audiences. It was fairly successful in the box office, but didn't capture the same attention that Iron Man did just a month prior. This would be the last Marvel film to release that Feige didn't have full control over. Marvel wouldn't release another film until 2010, and of course, it had to be a sequel to Iron Man. When the movie hit theaters, it was once again a box office success, pulling in around $623 million on a $200 million budget. It didn't really outperform the original, but was an important film for the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a whole. It not only hinted at the Avengers, but also sparked fans' interest into what was to come from the studio. This was Feige's vision coming to life. In 2011, the first Thor film would release and lay the foundation for the style of storytelling the MCU would use. Then 2 months later, Captain America: The First Avenger came out and became the official start to the MCU's timeline. As much as these films were a huge key to the entire picture, one trailer would almost outshine them entirely. On October 11th of 2011, the world got its first look at The Avengers, a film that would soon go down in cinema history forever. It was not only the first time we would see all the characters teaming up, but almost as important, it was the first time we saw Feige's master plan fully coming together. Anticipation for the film's release was huge, and on May 4th of 2012, audiences finally got to join the Avengers on the big screen. It was an immediate success and the first film from Marvel to make over $1 billion worldwide. Critics and fans couldn't get enough of the impressive visual effects, action sequences, musical score, and overall direction of the film. Feige had proved more than ever that his vision was not only a moneymaker, but a global phenomenon. As great as it was, it would later become a bit of a roadblock for the studio. Since Feige seemed to have the perfect formula, all of the Marvel films to follow were forced into a very particular way of doing things. Phase 2, known as the Age of Ultron, would continue to grow the MCU even bigger. This would also shift Marvel to become set up almost like an assembly line. Instead of bringing in filmmakers who wanted to add their own touches, voice, and innovations to the films, the studio stuck with people that were willing to fall in line with what Feige and the other higher-ups at Marvel wanted. It slowly started to become more noticeable as each new release started to feel very similar. The storyline, story beats, and overall style became almost identical in each film, though they still had enough variation that it didn't slow down the success of these films. The beginning of Phase 2 would follow a similar order to Phase 1. We received a new Iron Man that takes place shortly after the events of the first Avengers film, a new Thor that takes place a year later, and a new Captain America that takes place 2 years after the first Avengers. All of these movies performed incredibly well in the box office, and the 3 films combined released made around $2.5 billion. On August 1st of 2014, a whole new crew was introduced into the MCU, spicing things up even more. Guardians of the Galaxy expanded the universe by not only bringing in new characters, but also adding space into the mix. It brought forth new planets, civilizations, and a new war. This film also stood out because of its style and presentation. It used a lot of 1960s and 1970s songs, and it felt unique among the previous Marvel films. Guardians made $771 million in the box office and left fans not only excited about this new crew, but also wanting more from them. Only a month later, Avengers: Age of Ultron hit theaters. This time around, fans were excited because the trailers presented the film with a much darker tone than the first entry. This turned out to not really be the case, but the film still crushed it in the box office, making $1.4 billion. It was slightly less than the first film, and it was much more divisive for fans of the series. Some people found it to be great, and others were disappointed. The film seemed to be lacking in some areas, as it sets up a lot, but doesn't really resolve much of it. It's almost as if certain scenes were cut out that shouldn't have been, and other scenes were left that should have been cut out or trimmed down. This entry tends to be the Avengers film that audiences dislike the most, and Marvel might have shot themselves in the foot a bit by announcing Avengers: Infinity War before Age of Ultron even hit theaters. The third phase is where things get really interesting. In the span of 4 years, Marvel would release a total of 11 films. For comparison, the first phase included 6 movies in 5 years, and in phase 2, 6 new entries in 3 years. Marvel really started to increase the amount of productions they had going, but surprisingly, the quality was still there for the most part. The films that make up phase 3 had great success, but it did start to feel like the genre was getting a bit oversaturated. Each new entry did continue to expand and add to the universe, building hype towards another Avengers movie, but that was really what fans cared about most. It also became even more apparent that the films were following a pretty set format. In return, the innovations seen in earlier Marvel films became less and less so. Even with this pretty particular way of the movies playing out, characters still continued to grow and have major character arcs. Marvel also threw in some solo films for new characters with the addition of Ant-Man, which actually came out at the end of phase 2. Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, Black Panther, and Captain Marvel were also welcomed into the universe with their own individual films. These kept things fresh with some new faces and stories that added to the layers of the MCU. On April 26th of 2019, the time had finally come for fans to see what everything had been building up to, and the hype was astonishing. Theaters were packed full for weeks as fans came out to see Avengers: Endgame. It shattered records and became the second highest grossing film of all time, making almost $2.8 billion worldwide. Fans were ecstatic to see all the characters come together for one massive universe-wide battle. As incredible as it was, Marvel had also seemingly trapped themselves into a corner. Iron Man was killed off, Captain America gets old and retires, and Avengers: Endgame feels like, well, the end. After the release of Endgame, Marvel had some soul-searching to do. They had put their marquee characters to rest and began trying to introduce a new set of characters to the world. Shang-Chi would receive a film in 2021 and be the start of Phase 4. It was fairly successful, but nowhere near the success of a character like Iron Man. Also in 2021, the Eternals would enter the scene doing decent in the box office, but this was also the first time an MCU film would receive a huge amount of negative reviews. The Spider-Man films continued to have success during this time, but there was certainly a shift in how Marvel films were performing overall and being perceived by audiences. It really started to feel like the studio started focusing more on quantity rather than quality. There really wasn't anything new, so to speak, in these movies. They continued to use the same old format, and this made things feel less exciting. They had to find a way to keep fans interested after losing some of their major characters. So in 2021, Marvel would release their first Disney Plus exclusive TV show. This opened up a whole new world of spin-offs and series for the MCU. In the span of about 3 years, there has now been a total of 13 shows with a total of 92 episodes as a whole and 9 movies at the date of making this video. That's a massive amount of content for any studio, even one the size of Marvel. This increase in content has absolutely affected the quality. All you have to do is look at the reviews for a series like Secret Invasion that felt rushed, terribly written, and poorly executed overall. Then there's a film like The Marvels that only made $206 million with a budget of $270 million, officially making it the lowest grossing MCU movie in history. It also has the worst reviews of any MCU movie out there. With releases like this, it totally feels like the studio has lost its hold on the industry. As mentioned earlier, Marvel had to step away from their most iconic characters. There's still plenty of characters to work with, but none of them stand out like the original crew. The studio spent 11 years building up those characters, and audiences got to watch them grow, change, fight off villains, save the world, and come together as one. Fans are extremely connected to these characters because of that. The new ones being introduced don't have that connection with fans, and because of the lack of quality in these new movies and series, audiences aren't being pulled into them as they previously were. Think about how well crafted Tony Stark's character arc was. He went from a self-absorbed rich guy to literally sacrificing himself for the world. His growth throughout the series was massive, and that's one of the keys to why people were so invested in his story. Take Captain America as another example. He was there to lead the Avengers and bring everyone together. Right now, there just isn't anyone who seems to be progressing the MCU forward or developing in the way that previous characters did. It's certainly possible that this new era will eventually click with audiences, but even some of the old characters that are still around, like Ant-Man, have seen a decline in the quality of their films, resulting in negative reviews and poor performance in the box office. If Marvel wants to shift the direction they're heading in, they'll need to find ways to build these characters up like they did with the previous ones. There needs to be more emphasis on developing their stories, making them interesting, and doing it in a way that doesn't feel rushed or forced. Having crossovers with the characters has all but seemed to vanish since Endgame. This is one of the elements that made the story so unique and interesting. When we look at a film like Shang-Chi though, there's nothing in this film that connects it to any of the other characters. As a standalone film, it's actually pretty solid, but there has yet to be a crossover with his character. Connecting the characters and bringing them together keeps fans invested. It not only shows how they interact together, whether it's for the good or the bad, but also allows relationships between them to grow. This helps create powerful moments between characters who have gone through so much together. Now it feels like all the new ones are just doing everything on their own, and this just doesn't have the same impact. The MCU used to have villains with solid goals, motivations, and some even stuck around across multiple films. The issue with the more recent ones stems a lot from how they are written. Take Dar-Benn from the Marvels, for example. She seeks revenge for the destruction of her homeworld. The goal here is pretty clear, but we never really see how that event personally affected her or how she became the main antagonist. We're just told that she suffered from this event and it turned her evil. We aren't shown this suffrage or transition into her becoming who she is. Anyone affected by that event could easily take the path she's chosen, therefore she comes off feeling very forgettable and uninspired. Thanos, on the other hand, was built out across several films with very clear intentions. Plus, other elements like the Infinity Stones gave depth to the plot as a whole and led fans up to the final battle with him. Over time, we learn more about his character, his power, and why he is truly a threat. All of this backstory and little details made fans more invested and helped create a villain that was actually fun to watch and one that audiences actually cared about. That's why the battle against him was so impactful, because there was so much backstory already built up, making the payoff worth it and feel important. Marvel also introduced Kang and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. He was set to be the next central villain in the MCU, but actor Jonathan Majors, who plays Kang, was convicted on 2 misdemeanor counts of harassment and assault. After the guilty verdict, Marvel immediately dropped him, resulting in Kang needing to be replaced. This was definitely something the studio had not planned for. However, after this situation, it was announced that Robert Downey Jr. would be returning to the franchise, not as Tony Stark, but rather Dr. Doom. He has yet to appear in any films, but is supposed to be the villain in the upcoming Avengers film, Avengers Doomsday, which is set to release sometime in 2026. Maybe this is what the MCU needs. Audiences already fell in love with Robert Downey Jr.'s performance as Iron Man, and a lot of fans are excited to see him as Dr. Doom. There is some concern that Marvel could rush his story like they have with recent villains, and since he isn't supposed to be in any upcoming films until the new Avengers, it's a little worrisome. Plus, Marvel was never planning for him to be the main villain. However, Marvel does have some time to get his story right, and hopefully Robert Downey Jr. can make sure that the studio does the character justice. This could easily be the villain the MCU needs, but in the meantime, there still needs to be solid and captivating villains in other upcoming films that are well written and fleshed out. The MCU is definitely in an odd place. Marvel did see some success recently with the release of Deadpool and Wolverine that broke several records and made over $1 billion worldwide. It was certainly refreshing to see the studio put out something fun and pretty well crafted, though it does still have some flaws. It's not the movie that's going to save the MCU by any means, but hopefully one that motivates Marvel to put out quality over quantity. They have extremely passionate fans that deserve good films with well-written stories, characters that are fleshed out, visual effects that are top of the line, and just overall a fun time. It definitely feels like Marvel has forgotten what made the MCU such a powerful and captivating franchise in the first place. If something doesn't change, then it's very possible that we could be witnessing the downfall of one of the most successful movie studios of all time. Looking at the future, it does seem like they are pushing the brakes a bit by canceling several shows and movies. As of right now, there are 4 films set to release in 2025 and 1 in 2026, which is of course the return of the Avengers. Only time will tell if the studio is able to bounce back and learn from their mistakes. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on the current state and future of both the MCU and Marvel as a whole. Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like and consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.